Ohio lawmakers and gun control.
From the Patel studio at WOSU at COSI, this is Columbus on the Record. Joining Mike Thompson this week, Bill Cohen, State House correspondent for Ohio Public Radio. Julie Carr-Smythe, State House correspondent for the Associated Press. Janetta King, president of Innovation Ohio. And Michael Miller, attorney and former Franklin County prosecutor.
In this week's call for more gun regulations, President Obama urged people who live in areas where gun ownership is strong, places like Ohio, he called on them to support his plan. The president wants bans on assault weapons and large-capacity magazines. He wants tighter and more background checks. He wants more regulation of gun shows, as well as increased mental health treatment and additional police officers in schools. He said we cannot put it off any longer.
In the month since 20 precious children and 6 brave adults were violently taken from us at Sandy Hook Elementary, more than 900 of our fellow Americans have reportedly died at the end of a gun. 900 in the past month. And every day we wait, that number will keep growing.
Some gun owners, gun manufacturers, and supporters of gun owners' rights quickly denounced the plan as an attack on the Second Amendment. Take this ad from the NRA.
Are the president's kids more important than yours? Then why is he skeptical about putting armed security in our schools when his kids are protected by armed guards at their school? Mr. Obama demands the wealthy pay their fair share of taxes, but he's just another elitist hypocrite when it comes to a fair share of security. Protection for their kids and gun-free zones for ours.
Michael Miller, you're a strong conservative. You've prosecuted gun crimes. You've defended folks who've been charged with using a gun in crimes. How do you view the president's proposal?
I think it's needed. I'm basically in agreement with a lot of the things that he says. I've long felt that there are far too many guns in society. I understand the Second Amendment. It's there, and I'm glad it is there. But on the other hand, these assault weapons, these things that I just think serve no purpose whatsoever or very little value. They're just there to cause trouble, I think. And after these repeated mass killings, I'm not saying you're going to stop them. We have unbalanced people and so forth, and I don't know it can ever be stopped. But nevertheless, I think you've got to do something about it. And basically, conservative, Republican or not, I tend to agree with the president.
What do you think? I mean, the president called on folks who live in rural areas out west. I mean, that fits to a lot of Ohio. Does Ohio go along with this, or is Ohio's lawmakers going to say we don't want any part of more regulations?
Ohio's in kind of an interesting position because our last governor, a Democrat, was probably more pro-gun than our current governor, a Republican. So,
he had a higher rating
right.
from the NRA.
Yeah, and I think John Kasich, as a congressman, supported assault weapons ban, and I wonder how this will play in terms of the debate at our state house. I don't know that it's necessarily going to fall along party lines at all. And one interesting sort of perhaps tip of the hat was that or tip of the hand, I should say, was at this week's Senate Democratic caucus rollout of their legislative agenda, in which they were very hesitant to say that their final gun control bill would include an assault weapons ban. I think that they're being very cautious.
And I think it'll be interesting to see if Ohio elected officials will side with the public on these issues, because the polls show that the public does support, for example, background checks for all guns, almost 80%. But there's now, unfortunately, a very extreme wing that has risen up and is pressuring lawmakers to not accept any of these reforms. And so that's going to be the question for Ohio's elected officials, especially those in Congress. They are in very safe districts after the redistricting. And can the public put enough pressure on them? Will they listen to the public or to the extremists?
Bill Cohen, the guys you got to look at are Pat Tiberi. He's in a safe Republican district, but a lot of suburban areas which might be more in line with might want more regulations. Steve Stivers the same way. How do you think more moderate Republicans might view this?
Yeah, I think those two are a little more moderate, although I read some comments from Stivers that hint he's not in favor of a lot of these things. I think one interesting point is the assault. You know, a lot of people say, why should anybody have one of these assault weapons except to do wrong? But I'm not sure if there's a whole lot of evidence. I don't know. I've seen a lot of evidence that when we did have the assault weapons ban for 10 years, did we have fewer of these kinds of assaults? I'm not sure. I haven't seen any good statistics. But
right, and I believe that is what Governor Kasich has said, is that it really didn't work, and he did support it before, but it's unproven that it's very effective.
And yet, whether it worked or not, still people feel very strongly, and I don't think even that lack of evidence, if there is a lack of evidence, is going to change anybody's mind. People say there's still no reason for these assault weapons to be out there.
But Michael, if you look at the shootings that have happened just in the past month here in Columbus, they're all handguns for the most part. I mean,
sure,
it's not assault weapons. It's not 10-round magazines, that kind of thing.
No, that's right. I know Chicago has had 500 in the last month, and I'm sure 95% of those are handguns. That's true. But I think in this argument about just general gun control down through the years, at least recent years, the NRA has won everything. I don't think that's going to happen this time. Do I think there'll be an assault ban? I doubt it. And I think the president is putting a lot of things in there he knows he can't do with smart politics, because there's going to be some bartering and so forth. I think the background checks will ultimately be done. I think it's very hard for anybody rational to say we're not going to do that. I think it's out there, but it's different this time. Maybe not rationally it's different this time, but it's different this time because we had 20 children killed. And that is going to affect people differently. If there would have been 20 of us, it would not have had the same effect. That may not be a rational response, but I think it's a real one. And I think we'll see something. It'll be bitter, it'll be harsh, but I think we'll see something. Will it solve all the problems? No. Will we continue to have these things? We will.
And I'm sad. Right, and when you see this week elementary school teachers and others going to these gun trainings being held by the state, I mean, it just resonates differently. You know, a kindergarten classroom is supposed to be a safe place to be.
Police officers, they generally are in favor of increased regulations. They don't want to do away with guns. I mean, I think a lot of them are hunters and gun owners themselves, but they are not in favor of concealed carry.
Correct.
They don't want the assault weapons on the streets, for obvious reasons. They don't want them used against them. Why aren't they more of a force in this debate than, say, why aren't they an equal force to the NRA?
Well, I think it's politics. I mean, the NRA has asserted themselves as a very strong force, especially on Capitol Hill and the states. And while, law enforcement, they are certainly, we sympathize with them, we support them. The NRA has a political operation that really may be unmatched. And for politicians taking votes, they're looking over their shoulder.
And the concealed carry debate in the Ohio legislature over the last 10 years is a great example. The police, the chiefs, and the guys on the street, they were against legalizing concealed weapons, and yet we got the basic law in several years ago. And then every year that's happened since then, there's been a little, chipping away and relaxing of the places so that concealed weapons can be in more and more places. And the cops, the police, continually lose the battle.
Has the far right, the fringe right, we saw that ad, which was, most people would say it's ridiculous. I mean, of course, the president's kids need to have protection. I mean, he's drone attacking terrorists, for God's sake. So, but they don't seem to. The far right doesn't seem to understand that that's not how most people think. Would you agree with that, Mike? That they're kind of in their own little world.
I do think it's their own little world, but it's a powerful little world. I mean, there's lots of money. There's lots of people that feel very strong that, the slightest infringement on any weapons is a violation of the Second Amendment. I just don't happen to think that's true. But, we're seeing some things with Governor Cuomo in New York, and I think you're going to see some states do some things. Whether it has a lasting effect is certainly not a panacea. We can't stop these things. But I believe the general process of changing things is going to go forward, and we're going to see some change.
Okay. Let's get to our next topic. Very early in his campaign for governor, John Kasich said he wanted to do away with the state income tax. But in the midst of a deep recession, which saw a steep decline in tax revenues, the governor put that idea aside. Now, preparing his second two-year state budget, the income tax cut idea is back. Check out this video sent to Kasich supporters this week.
Let me just suggest to all of you, and I know there's skeptics among you, this income tax is too darn high. And people say, well, we've already lowered it, and did it do any good? Well, yeah, it's done good. We've got 127,000 jobs, including a more friendly business climate. But this tax at 5.9% is too high.
Bill Cohen, 5.9%, is that too high?
Well, if you compare it to some other states, it is on that top bracket. Texas and Florida, I'm told, have no income tax. The tax department here says Illinois, Indiana, Michigan, Pennsylvania have flat income taxes, about 3 to 5%. So it's that top bracket that Kasich is especially upset about because it's almost 6%, and that's on incomes above 200,000 or so. But those are the folks that Kasich says are the job creators, and that's where he wants to make sure that that level comes down.
Will it happen? But I guess it's not a question of will it happen, it's how much it comes down, I guess, at this point, with the Republican legislature, Republican governor.
I think if they can make a compelling case in this budget that they have a tax reform package that will save money and that they can do it without raising taxes, that is certainly going to be the goal. I mean, the big pushback is coming from the oil and gas industry because they're trying to raise taxes on them in order to fund this, and that has been, the governor has been adamant about it. The industry has said this is not a fair thing, that you're discouraging a new industry that's bringing jobs to really hard-hit areas of the state. So how that plays out, I think, will be a compromise of some kind.
And we can't have this debate data-free on if decreasing the income tax creates jobs, because we did do it in 2005. And Kasich was very fond of saying that in Ohio's recent history, we lost 400,000 jobs. Well, that was at that same time that the income tax was being cut. We really do need to look at what happens when you do cut the income tax. And there are two direct things that happen that the research shows very clearly. And that's one, you have to cut other services, and you have to cut other spending. And, most recently, we've seen local property taxes, income taxes increase because of some of those significant state cuts. So while he may give a tax cut that will primarily benefit the wealthy, that responsibility then is going to fall to locals who are either going to have to increase their taxes or see additional cuts in services on top of what was delivered to them in the last budget.
Now, the governor argues that the income tax cut did help a little. That's why we've added 130,000 jobs over the past 2 years. That it might have been delayed, but lower taxes, less government has boosted the economy.
I just don't think that you can make that correlation. I mean, he also was unwilling to say that the auto bailout helped to create jobs, despite the fact that the research said it did. So I think that he is, trying to make an argument where the research doesn't back it up. And I think that people, just like at the federal level, where we saw support for increasing taxes on the wealthiest, I don't think that they are going to say that the wealthiest shouldn't pay their fair share and they should get another tax cut.
And as you point out, the state cuts of taxes and government and cutbacks on schools and cities has prompted some cities and schools to have to raise their own taxes. And Kasich and his budget advisors are among the first to say it's not just the state income tax that matters, it's the combined state and local. So they really have to look out for when they lower the state income tax and cut services and money to the locals, that the locals don't raise tax. Now, there was a time a year or two ago where Kasich was sending a signal to schools and cities. Do not raise your tax, even if the voters even if the voters agree to go along with a tax hike. Please don't put those proposals on the ballot. We don't even want local tax hikes.
Michael Miller, there's been hints that he might do a larger overhaul. More than just reduce the rate, including, sales tax on professional services like public relations, attorneys, architecture, that kind of thing. Tax newspapers, they were exempt now from the income tax. Do you see that big a sweeping tax overhaul coming?
I think anything is possible. I think he's going to look at every option, and I think we're definitely going to have a tax reduction. What it is, it'll probably be a compromise, as you suggested, and I'm sure it will be. But how he goes about it, I think the 5.9 clearly comes down, whether it's augmented by other changes such as attorneys. charging the sales tax and other things. That may well be. I don't know. But I think he will do what he has to do to get a reduction, and I believe this governor, when he says he's going to do something, generally does it. So I think it's going to happen. He's got control of both houses, and I think we're going to see it.
Well, and I think that Grover Norquist's group, the Americans for Tax Reform, lost a little of its traction this last cycle. There was a lot of talk about the fact that pledge to not raise taxes was really holding hostage some of our legislative processes. However, I think tax reform packages are the best way for politicians to walk this line and to say, okay, I'm just going to tweak it a little bit over there, and it might look like a hike, but look how I'm lowering it over here. So he can deliver on his promise with actually some increases in other areas.
And if Kasich can't get the tax hike on drillers, he might still try to fund an income tax cut by maybe getting some of the natural growth in other taxes and use that for it. Because remember, this is the guy who, when he was running for governor, said he wants to wipe out the entire state income tax. So he's really determined.
I think that's going to be the name of the game on the budget. Kasich's going to be cobbling together whatever resources he can to provide this income tax cut going into 2014.
All right. The governor's plan to reform education is also expected to be unveiled in the next couple of weeks. Of course, Ohio's system of funding public education remains unconstitutional. It's been that way for 16 years since the Ohio Supreme Court ruled in the DeRolf case. 3 governors have tried to fix the system. Their plans came, their plans went. Now it's Governor Kasich's turn. Julie Carr Smythe, let's run them down. George Voinovich tried to raise the sales tax. Didn't work. Bob Taft increased funding for local school construction. That seemed to work. Schools got money. Ted Strickland, evidence-based education. It was gone as soon as Kasich was sworn in. What's next?
Well, I think what Kasich has signaled to us, he's been very close to the vest on this, but he's interested in what they call output-based do I have that right? Outcome-based?
Yeah.
But basically, in other words, how do the students perform? What are they doing on their tests? How is that school building doing? How is that school district doing at actually educating kids? It's very controversial because, the issue can be I, as a teacher, can't always control the student I get in there, or the demographic of my district, the demographic of my classroom or my school. But that's one of the things. He's also signaled that he's looking at empowering districts to give some performance-based incentives, bonuses, raises to those whose students do really well. And another controversial proposal that he's seen in Cleveland in that program. And innovations in online education is another thing he's hinted at. And so I think there's going to be a package of big policy ideas combined with.
Does this get at the heart of the issue in the DeRolf case, which is that the Ohio is too reliant on property taxes, and that's why it's unequal across the state?
As I was sort of thinking about this question, I don't know how they do that, or if we've heard really the hints of how they do that.
And I think if Kasich was concerned solving that problem, we wouldn't have seen a previous budget that he introduced cutting education by $1.8 billion. I mean, that just hasn't been a priority. Now, the reforms certainly are something that he talks very aggressively about, but in terms of making sure the funding is there and to give property tax relief, that just hasn't been something that he has put on the table as a priority. So you may see reforms, but I don't think that you see any good faith effort to actually fund some of the things that he would make schools do as part of his package.
And there's no pressure from this court to make him do this. The court several years ago signaled, even though 4 earlier versions of our court said it was unconstitutional, a new Republican majority took over and said, we're making it clear, we're not going to force these legislators to do anything. That was a pretty clear signal.
Michael Miller, what do you think about bonuses for teachers, outcome-based, where it's based on test scores and things like that for the schools? Is that going to work?
Mike, it is such a problem. There's some of the legislature, some of the research has shown, depending on certain situations dealing with income and so forth, poor people don't do as well. They probably don't have the advantages that people with some money do. I don't know if you're a teacher in a school district that's wealthy and so forth, if you do well, you should get a raise, where somebody who's in a poor district, which a much more difficult problem, doesn't, they don't get anything. It is such a problem. I don't know what the answer is. I think he's going to try and look at every conceivable possibility, and hopefully something's out there. I'm glad that he is meeting with a number of people, the guy from Stanford and so forth, and getting some views that from a national level that maybe we can get something done. But it is not an easy problem to solve.
No,
it is very, very difficult.
Yeah, and I think that one thing that he said is that he would prefer to see these things come up from the grassroots. So what we may see is some adjustments in the law and in requirements so that districts have some more flexibility to work with their unions and to come up with these kind of things.
One phrase we're going to hear a lot is he wants the money to follow the student. Bill Cohen, what does that mean?
I'm not sure. I guess one thing it means is let's not have so many administrators, assistant superintendents, assistant to the assistant superintendent, and so on and so on. But I think a lot of folks would say most of the money is already going into the classroom if you count teacher salaries, and of course that's a key.
Yeah.
And I think it also means that there are going to be more resources going into charter and private schools. You know, when the money follows the child to those alternatives, that is something also that the traditional public schools are dealing with because they're not getting any more money. And in fact, resources are being siphoned from the traditional public schools into charters. And that's going to be another big debate because there's a lot of concern about what results charters produce.
I think it's absolutely right. And another thing the governor has said more than once is, you know, I believe you ought to pay people who do a good job more money. And he said that a number of times, which I think is going to show itself in whatever he comes out with this education bill. There's going to be that.
One thing almost always missing, though, from this whole debate is the role of parents. We know early childhood stuff is the most important. We know when parents read to their kids and make their kids do their homework, they do well. And we're always dealing with the formula and all these phrases, bureaucratic phrases. Nobody's come up with a good way to prod parents to get involved.
McDonald's is putting books in Happy Meals now.
Okay,
Instead of toys. See, it's good stuff. Let's get to our last topic. A large part of the federal health care law calls for states to expand Medicaid coverage. Under the federal law, more low-income people would qualify for government health care coverage. The goal is to get health care for the uninsured, and the law basically ordered states to do it. But in its ruling upholding most of the law, the U.S. Supreme Court said the feds cannot order states to expand Medicaid, so now it's optional, and now it's up to Governor Kasich to decide. Janetta King, the feds have promised money to fully fund this for the first couple of years anyway. The governor worries that, you know, we've heard this before, we're going to get left holding the bag to pay the bill. Is that fear real?
No, I think the governor's going to do it. I think that in this budget he is going to expand Medicaid, and here's why. It is post-election, and Obamacare is here to stay. And like it or not, the federal government has given us tools to cover more people. Also, the business community, the hospitals, major employers in Ohio have come out and said this is the responsible thing to do. And finally, just this past week, a nonpartisan group released a study that did in fact show that not only are we going to be able to cover more insured or uninsured, we're going to be able to create jobs, but the state's actually going to be able to save money over the next 10 years because of where we have to spend it now to cover the uninsured. So that right now there's not a good excuse to not do this. Now, Kasich will likely have to revise his numbers. He put out some initial numbers that showed the cost would be significant. There have been some pushback on those numbers. And
Florida went back on their numbers and they said that
yes,
it's
so he'll
not going to
likely
cost as much.
revise, but go forward with the expansion.
Will Republican lawmakers go along with the governor on this if he decides to do it?
Well, this is going to be tough for them. I would anticipate that if they do, they will have to move really quickly. Maybe we'll get a budget by May instead of June, because a lot of them ran against Obamacare. We passed that constitutional amendment a couple years ago that said we shouldn't mandate health. We shouldn't make health mandates. And so politically, there has been a lot of conversation about how bad this is. Those who have committed to it, I haven't counted up how many of those there are, but those votes are going to be tough to sway for that reason.
But when you have the Medical Association and the Chamber of Commerce, along with the liberal groups pushing it, you've got virtually the whole spectrum, except for the Tea Party folks, and they are a significant chunk, but I don't think they're a majority.
The hospitals want this because if there's more Medicaid, there's more people insured, and they have fewer bills from the uninsured walking into the emergency room, right?
It helps them money-wise, and clearly, I think that's right. But I think, as far as the Ohio legislators, if they are convinced, as Jenna just said, and you mentioned about Florida, that they do these numbers and we do save money, then I think that's all right. And I think we're going to see a reduction of from Kasich's original numbers, what it would cost, down. And if they accept that, then I think they'll pass.
Yeah. All right, let's get to our final off-the-record parting shots. Michael Miller, up first.
Well, back to the gun control. I think it's going to go on for the next 4 years of the president's administration. I think there's going to be a fight that is going to be tremendous. It'll last the entire time. The elections will be affected in 2014 and 2016, and I think we'll see. And I can see a number of people in the government running for election are going to have to take a stand, and hopefully we'll see some people that will stand up against the NRA and do what they think is right.
Janetta.
I'm predicting in the next 30 days, Kasich is going to have to intervene on this Turning Point solar fiasco. Recently, his PUCO voted to kill the creation of 600 jobs, including several hundred going to veterans. I think it's a public relations nightmare, and he's going to have to do something.
Julie.
Next week, we'll get to see the outcome, perhaps, of the Clayton Luckey, Representative Clayton Luckey criminal allegations, and he has a court date on Tuesday, so I anticipate an outcome.
And Bill.
A decade ago, you might remember Christian Conservatives pushed a plan for a new kind of a marriage contract option, one that would be harder to get a divorce. That went nowhere, but now we've got some Democrats in the Ohio Senate pushing the idea, not that exact idea, but something with a similar thrust, a waiting period for marriage licenses, a waiting period for divorces. So perhaps there could be some agreement.
Okay, my final thought, don't forget to watch our inauguration coverage on WOSU TV, 11 o'clock on Monday. Ironically enough, it's right after Big Bird and Sesame Street. 11 o'clock on PBS. That's Columbus on the Record for this week. Check us out online for our crew here and for our panel. I'm Mike Thompson. Have a good week.